So, you've probably seen these iceberg images floating around. They've been around for over a full year and a half, and typically talk about video games or movies. Starting from the top of the iceberg that has the most well-known entries of the iceberg, going deeper down the iceberg, the more obscure or dark the entries get. So here I am with my iceberg talking about lost films. Not just any films, but horror films. And since I don't think this trend will melt anytime this year, I think this probably won't be late for the bandwagon. Also because this is the Halloween time. So I think horror films would be a perfect topic for this year. Not year. Time. I also include a few extras I forgot to add to the iceberg or while writing the script. So with all that being said, let's start this iceberg. London After Midnight was a 1927 silent horror film starring the most well-known silent film actor, Lon Chaney. Possibly the most well-known entry on this list, the film's plot involves a man being found dead in a London home, being ruled as a suicide by Detective Burke, who is Lon Chaney's character. Despite conflicting evidence, however, 5 years later, two vampiric characters now occupy the home, one being a male with a beaver hat and the other one being a woman. After a series of events, the man in the beaver hat is revealed to be Detective Burke. The film did really well at the box office, nearly making $1 million back, which is quite a lot for the 20s. However, the film was made out of nitrate, which is extremely flammable and can naturally deteriorate over time if stored incorrectly. And the last known copy was destroyed in the infamous 1965 MGM Vault fire, which also destroyed many other rare films. However, the film was a big release, so there is a chance that we can hopefully see this lost masterpiece one day. The Cat Creeps is an American horror film released in 1930. The film serves as a remake to a 1927 silent horror film called The Cat and the Canary, which fortunately does exist. The film is well known for being one of Universal's first sound horror films, and one of the first sound films in general, which I'll talk about later. The film also had a Spanish version which was filmed at night, after the main English cast left for the night, similar to how Universal would do later for Dracula a few months later. Unfortunately, the film is lost. However, 2 minutes survived in the 1932 Universal horror film simply called Boo, and was supposedly converted to 16mm film, but I haven't found concrete evidence for this claim, leaving both the Spanish and English versions lost. The Monster Frankenstein was a 1920 Italian horror film based on Mary Shelley's novel Frankenstein. The film was one of the only Italian horror films made before 1950, due to the censors being really strict. The film was actually a big hit, expanding out of Italy and into Belgium, Egypt, and France. The film was so popular that it was even reportedly screened 6 years after its release. However, the film is unfortunately lost, with only a few productions still surviving. The Phantom of an Opera is a horror film I probably don't have to even introduce to you. It was first released in 1925, but the cut you've probably been seeing is not even close to the original cut. The first cut was shown to a select crowd that apparently hated the film, causing the original filmmakers to re-edit it and making a second cut additionally adding a few new scenes. However, it was still negatively received, causing it to be re-edited for the second time, and was positively received. Unfortunately, the first two edits are completely lost, with only a little of the third edit surviving. The film will later be re-edited for the third time to have sound. Another reconstruction was made in 1953 called the Eastman print. Unfortunately, the first three edits are still lost. Dracula's Death, initially called Dracula Halala, was a Hungarian production initially released in Vienna. The film was about a woman experiencing hallucinations after being admitted to an insane asylum, where a man claims to be the vampire Dracula. She has trouble determining if her hallucinations are real or fiction. The film even had a novelization, which is the actual original origin of the supposed infamous poster. The novelization was rediscovered in the Budapest Archive Library in the late 90s. In 1923, the film was released, re-edited, and reshot under the well-known name The Death of Dracula, but unfortunately both edits are lost. However, in 2015, Troy Howarth released his book by the name of The Tome of Terror, which states a copy does exist in a Hungarian archive. That is yet to be confirmed, and it still remains lost to this very day. The Terror is an American horror film that was released in 1928, based on a 1927 play by Edgar Wallace. The film is about the Terror, a killer who resides in an English country house that has been converted into an inn. Several guests check into the inn. The cast is pretty diverse, including a spiritualist, 2 men who just got out of prison who swore revenge upon the Terror. And after one night, the identity of the Terror is revealed. The film is actually the first sound horror film in history, and the second Warner Brothers talkie. The film did well at the box office, but pretty bad critically. A silent film of the film was even made, and is 5 minutes longer than the sound film, and is said to be far superior than the sound version. The film was supposedly unfortunately destroyed on December 27th, 1948, and the only thing that survives from the film are the Vitaphone discs, which are held at the UCLA and Television and Film Archive. However, they haven't been publicly revealed and still remain lost to this very day. Going Ghetto is a 1920 American horror film about a serial killer getting their brain transplanted into an ape's body, and the beast goes on a killing spree. The film starred actor and professional wrestler Bull Montana, who played the ape in the film. The film was also remade in 1941 as The Monster and the Girl. The film was considered lost for decades until a print was found in an Italian archive in 2017, but unfortunately hasn't been publicly released as October 2021. Der Phantom der Opera, also known as The Phantom of the Opera in English, was an adaptation of The Phantom of the Opera, technically being the first adaptation of the story in film history. The film was initially released in Germany in 1916 and is now unfortunately considered a lost film, with barely evidence of the film even surviving. The film is so obscure that no photos, footage, or even posters survive. But even if the film did exist, it probably could never compare to the 1925 version starring Lon Chaney that we talked about earlier. Grizzly 2 is a horror film that was initially filmed in Hungary in 1983, but then released in 2020, which seems simple, right? A VHS bootleg in bad quality was uploaded to YouTube in 2007. The film was up on YouTube in 2018 when it was taken down, which technically makes this film lost, even though it was only for a short amount of time. Life Without a Soul is a very loose adaptation of Mary Shelley's Frankenstein novel. The film was initially released in 1915 and was a very loose adaptation of the novel. The film is about a young man who gives life. In the end, it is revealed that the events of the film are all a dream. The main differences between the film and the novel are that the names are changed, and also the man gives life to a statue instead of a dead body, which is like a very similar entry that I'll get to later. I think the best comparison to this film is Nosferatu, which is mainly the name's difference, leaving the main plot generally the same. Unfortunately, this film is lost, and would technically be the second Frankenstein adaptation put to film. Dracula is a classic horror film and is considered to be one of the greatest horror films of all time, but it isn't as complete as you may think. During its initial 1931 theatrical run, the ending included the character of Professor Van Helsing, played by Edward Van Sloan, doing an epilogue which implies the existence of vampires. However, during the 1936 reissue of the film, the bit was cut due to the motion picture code thinking the epilogue would offend religious audiences. However, In 1999, a documentary by the name of The Road to Dracula shows a small amount of footage from the epilogue. In September of 2021, the director of the documentary confirmed that the scene still did exist. However, Universal's quality control people had deemed the scene to be unusable in the documentary, explaining why little is shown in the documentary. The scene does fortunately exist, but is just privately held as of 2020. The Ghostbusters 2 is a sequel to the Ghostbusters. The film is okay in my opinion, but I think the more fascinating part about the film are not the film itself, but its lost deleted scenes. The deleted scenes include a scene in which supernatural effects are caused by slime, causing a train to stop due to technical difficulties. This in turn causes two workers to inspect the train tracks, causing both of them to find two demon frogs with large tongues. Yes, this is an actual part of the deleted scenes. Julie tries to capture Slimer. Of course, he does this by using KFC chicken legs, and he attempts this later by posing as a pizza delivery man. The list goes on. And another deleted scene in which a few other scenes were also deleted, but I think these two were the best to mention. My best guess for these scenes being left out is that they were too silly for the film. In 2013, a Kickstarter campaign was made to make a documentary talking about the deleted scenes, which unfortunately failed. With only a few production photos and stills remaining, these scenes will unfortunately probably remain lost for another while. Texas Chainsaw Massacre is a classic horror film which helped kickstart the slasher subgenre, but we're not looking at this horror classic today, but its sequel, The Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2. Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2 is a cult classic horror film, however, it does have a few deleted scenes. One deleted scene includes Dennis Hopper's character Lefty, who hallucinates chainsaws coming out of his hotel room's walls. Another cut scene includes famous film critic Joe Bob Briggs, another lost scene that takes place in a parking garage. A lot of these scenes I just mentioned were deleted due to Canon being upset at the lack of monsters in the film. As of writing this in October 2021, only 2 out of the 3 scenes I just mentioned have been found, with the only problem being that they're in extremely low quality, with only the 3rd scene being the scene with Lefty being the only one that hasn't been properly found. So hopefully the deleted scenes of this cult classic will be rediscovered one day. The Golem Trilogy was a series of 3 German horror films, with all of them being focused on the Golem, who is a creature from Jewish folklore. The first film being released in 1915, which is simply called Der Golem. The 1915 film is about an antique dealer finding the Golem while searching a Jewish temple. The Golem soon falls in love with the dealer's daughter, but when the daughter doesn't return the love, the Golem goes on a murderous rampage. Only around 5 minutes of the film survived, with the second reel being found in the same Argentinian film archive where the Lost Metropolis footage was also found in, but hasn't been publicly shown since 2017. Other reports say a European film collector tracked a complete print of the film in 1958, but remains an unconfirmed rumor. The 1917 sequel, The Golem and the Dancing Girl, is completely lost. There are also conflicting reports on the plot, some listed as a horror comedy, while others listed as a romantic horror comedy. In my personal opinion, I believe it is just a horror comedy. However, SilentEra.com states that a print may exist in the European film archive, with only a few production stills actually surviving. The third film, which was released in 1920, called The Golem and How He Came into the World, does fortunately exist in its entirety, serving as a prequel to the first film. All these films were made and starred Paul Wagner. I personally do hope the first 2 films are found, since I like the 20 prequel a lot. Hansel and Gretel is a horror TV special which first aired on the Disney Channel on Halloween night, 1983. The special is an adaptation of the classic children's story Hansel and Gretel. The special is mainly East Asian cast, specifically from Japan. The special was initially aired on October 31st, 1983. The special features many abstract props and sets, mainly in the witches' elves. The special was never aired again, technically becoming lost. For years, all that existed of the special was a screenshot and some pieces of concept art. Due to the lack of evidence, some people had just thought the special never existed. However, in 2009, the special was shown in its entirety, during the Tim Burton retrospective at the Museum of Modern Art and was finally uploaded online in 2014. King Kong appears in Edo is a Japanese monster film that was released in 1938. The film takes place in Japan's Edo time period, or basically just the medieval time period. The film also had a use of German expressionism set pieces and was supposedly the first Japanese monster film ever made. Yes, this predates Godzilla by 16 years. The film King Kong suit was designed by Fumino Kohasi, which I hope I'm pronouncing right, who claimed in the 80s that he made the suit for the film. Unfortunately, the film is now lost and was supposedly destroyed in the atomic bomb launched in Hiroshima, but hasn't been confirmed today and still remains lost to this very day. The Shining is a horror film that was released in 1980 and is considered to be one of the greatest horror films of all time. Despite the praise the film has gotten, the film still has some deleted scenes. There is the infamous hospital epilogue, which had the manager of the Overlook Hotel visiting Wendy and Danny at the hospital. But there were other scenes that were deleted. Quite recently, a work print of the film was auctioned off, which could have some deleted scenes, but we haven't seen it since it was auctioned off. Some of the deleted scenes were just alternate cuts of the scene, like for example, Halloran's death would have been much more gruesome, with Jack hitting him in the head and the spine with his axe. Some other scenes exist, but it's unlikely that they actually do exist in safe hands due to director Stanley Kubrick being infamous for showing his deleted scenes, so hopefully these scenes do exist somewhere, however it is extremely unlikely. Latent Fright is an Australian psychological thriller released back in 1971. The film was a big failure, mainly due to the negative portrayal of the Australian outback and the disturbing footage of kangaroo hunting. Due to the negative reception of the film, it fell into obscurity, with only a rarely screened TV censored cut existing, and a copy in insufficient quality from Ireland. This was the only remnant of the film until the original film's editor Anthony Buckley started a search for the film back in 1994. 8 years later, in 2002, Anthony found a copy of the film in a shipping container in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, labeled "For Destruction," which meant if Anthony had waited another week, we wouldn't have this film because it would have been destroyed. After this, a restoration of the film was released in 2009, which was released to critical acclaim, which means this is also one of the only small found entries. So yeah, don't expect many of them. Mr. Dracula is a Batman Dracula fan film made in 1964 by Andy Warhol. The film served as a homage to Batman, despite the film not even being approved by DC Comics. The film was filmed on New York rooftops in Andy Warhol's New York studio called The Factory. The film was screened in Andy Warhol's art exhibits. Ever since Andy Warhol's death, the film has been considered lost. However, in 2006, a documentary titled Jack Smith and the Destruction of Atlantis showed around 40% of the footage from the film, still unfortunately leaving the film as partially found and not completely found. It was a horror film released in 1913. The film was about a Native American woman becoming a witch after believing her husband had left her, and who then gets resurrected 100 years later and begins to go on a rampage, of course, as a werewolf. The film serves as the first werewolf film ever made in history, but was unfortunately destroyed in a book fire in 1924, leaving this piece of history as lost media. Of 1,000 Corpses is a cult classic horror film that was initially released in 2003 and by Lionsgate. However, it was initially filmed in 2000 and would have been released by Universal Studios. However, many scenes were cut out due to Universal fearing the film would get an NC-17 rating instead of the typical R rating that the film was meant to get. Two plot lines were entirely cut out of the film, with the first one being about a skunk ape, which did somewhat show up in the film, but in transitions and in inverted colors, whilst the other one is about a character named Ms. Bunny, who is entirely cut out of the film. Another alternate scene would have had Chris Hardwick's character Jerry being eaten alive by zombies. A production still of the scene still exists, but it's very graphic and I probably won't show on YouTube. And all I'll say is you can find it online. On March 15, 2003, the full uncut version was shown in Argentina at a film festival, but unfortunately hasn't been shown since. All American Massacre is an independent horror film which is an unofficial spin-off to the Texas Chainsaw Massacres Part 1 and 2, which I mentioned earlier. The film would have taken place 12 years after the Texas Chainsaw Massacre Part 2, seeing Bill Moseley's character Chop Tom being kept in a psychiatric prison, who would have been interviewed by a tabloid newspaper, causing him to get flashbacks specifically from the first Texas Chainsaw film. It started as a 10-minute short, but eventually became a 60-minute film. The film would have also had musical artist Buckethead making the music for the film, and who would have starred as Leatherface in the flashbacks for the film. The film had finished filming, but had ultimately, unfortunately, gotten released. The most likely reason that is theorized is that the film was probably unreleased due to budget issues. Something interesting happened. In 2013, the original negatives of the film were found in an abandoned locker of producer Eric Lasher. The negatives were then put up for auction on eBay, but it's currently unknown who won the auction. The most recent find was on March 8, 2020, when 1 minute and 37 seconds were found in Buckethead footage by Twitter user Leatherfave. As of October 2021, the film still has yet to be publicly released and found. Dead End was a horror mockumentary film made in 1985, which is about a documentary crew who investigate a UFO crash in a small town. But then the film crew finds out that a zombie apocalypse is broken out in the town, which was created by the UFO crash. The film is often compared to the Blair Witch Project and George A. Romero's The Diary of the Dead. Most of the people who have seen it mainly talk about the large amount of violence of the film. The film had supposedly never been released. Despite this, several people on IMDb have claimed to have seen the film. In 1987, the director of the film, Emerson Bixby, had claimed to have lost his personal copy of the film, leaving it extremely unlikely we'll ever see this film anytime soon. Cuckoo Closet of Hell is a 3-hour cut of the 1977 film Last House on Dead End Street. The film was received negatively due to the extreme violence in the film. It could even supposedly caused riots in the theater. Due to this, the film was cut down to 77 minutes and released as The Last House on Dead End Street. Since then, the cut hasn't been released since then, despite the 77 cut being released several times. Friday the 13th Part 3 is a horror film that was released in 1982, which is meant to serve as the third Friday the 13th film. The film isn't inherently lost because we have the full film, but the film has had more than one ending. The alternate ending would have had the main character, Chris, getting decapitated by a different, more unmasked Jason. The next part would have had Chris screaming in the back of a police car as the police try to frantically calm her down. This ending presumes that Chris survives her ordeal with Jason. The scene was filmed, but has never been released ever since we got the ending we have today. Another scene was written, but was never filmed. The scene isn't really that different, mainly just having small differences like the biker gang surviving. As of October 2021, the ending still remains lost to this very day. Freaks is a 1932 horror film which is directed by Todd Browning, who is also known as the guy who directed Dracula just 1 year prior to Freaks. The film is about a circus performer known as Cleopatra who tries to get with a little person and would have tried to get another circus performer known as Hercules to kill the little person to gain their inheritance. But when the circus freaks find this out, they kill her. The film does survive, but initially it had a different ending compared to what we have today. The original ending would have had the circus freaks actually kill Cleopatra and castrate Hercules. Production studio MGM had cut this ending due to negative feedback from test screenings. This scene was given a new ending, which is the one we have today. 89 years later, this ending is still lost and will probably remain like that for the rest of eternity. Son of Satan was a race horror film that was released in 1924. Not much of the plot is known other than that the main character loses a bet and has to spend the night in a haunted house. The film ran into censorship issues due to the intense violence in the film. It was extremely controversial and was even banned in one state just for the name alone. The film remains lost today and will probably remain like that for the next century. Nights of the Werewolf was a Spanish-French horror film which was supposedly filmed in 1968. The film would have been about a professor finding out one of his students can turn into a werewolf, and then proceeds to manipulate the student into attacking people he doesn't like for revenge. The film was supposedly filmed in France, in Paris to be specific, but it's unknown if the film had even existed because our main source for this is Paul Nashny, who supposedly starred in the film. According to Nashny, the main reason the film is lost is due to the death of supposed director Rene Gobar, who supposedly died in a car crash. Several theories exist on what happened to the film. Some believe that Rene Gobar had the film with him in the car and it was lost in the crash, whilst others believe it became the 1972 film The Fury of the Wolfman. In 2009, a documentary claims to show a still from the film but hasn't been confirmed. As of October 2021, the film has still yet to be confirmed to have even existed. Dracula, a supposed Russian adaptation of Bram Stoker's 1897 novel Dracula. If the film did ever exist, it would have been the first film adaptation of Dracula in history. Since the film was supposedly released in 1920, it's possible that the film could have been lost during the Russian Civil War, but hasn't been confirmed yet. The only reason we know about the film is because of the vampire book. The film may have been found in a Serbian film archive, but hasn't been confirmed yet. A short black and white film is often associated to be the lost film, but is an obvious fake. As of 2021, it still hasn't even been confirmed that the film has even existed. So before I do end the video properly, I just want to explain this, aka this small little 3 month break I've gotten. So I didn't intentionally take it. I mean, I was burnt out from YouTube, but I wasn't going to take another few month break. However, my microphone decided to just stop working. What happened? I don't know. Like, I seriously have no idea what happened to that microphone. But right now, you're hearing me with a better microphone. Hopefully this microphone doesn't end up like the old one. Probably not. Hopefully not. But time will tell. So, also, because of school, not mainly because of school, so I would have probably made some videos here and there, but somewhat because of school. So don't really expect me to go into these breaks. I'll try not to. Also, now I'll probably make videos monthly, or at the very least every 3 weeks. So if I don't upload for a month, don't worry, I'm not dead. I'm still alive. I'm just taking time with my videos, because this video's script took almost a month to write. So yeah, that's kind of it. So I think I'll just see you guys in the next video.